The mining station Omega-7 floated in the darkness between two dying stars, where most beings never traveled unless they had no other choice. Jake worked there because the pay was good and nobody asked questions about your past. He spent his days fixing broken equipment and his nights staring at the strange colors of the twin suns through his cabin window. Life on Omega-7 was predictable until the day an elf ship docked at Platform 9. Jake had seen elves before, but only in passing. They usually stayed in the rich sectors of space where everything was clean and beautiful. This ship was different, though. It looked damaged with scorch marks along its silver hull and one engine completely dark. Jake was eating his lunch in the observation deck when he first saw her. She moved through the corridor like she was dancing with gravity itself. Her skin had a soft blue shimmer that made her look like moonlight on water. Her silver hair floated around her shoulders, defying the artificial gravity that kept everyone else firmly on the ground. 3 small creatures followed her, and Jake nearly choked on his sandwich when he realized they were dragons. The dragons were each the size of a small cat, but covered in scales that caught the light like precious gems. One was deep ruby red with eyes like tiny flames. Another was emerald green with scales that seemed to shift and move like leaves in wind. The third was sapphire blue with wings that looked like pieces of captured sky. They made soft chirping sounds as they floated around the elf woman, sometimes landing on her shoulders or arms. Jake watched as she approached the station master, a grumpy old human named Bill, who rarely smiled at anyone. But even Bill seemed affected by her presence. He actually stood up straighter and attempted to smooth down his messy gray hair. The elf woman spoke to him in a voice that carried across the observation deck like music. She needed repairs for her ship, and she needed them quickly. Bill scratched his head and pointed in Jake's direction, saying something Jake could not hear. The elf woman turned and looked straight at him. Her eyes were violet, like the deep space between galaxies. Jake felt his heart skip several beats as she started walking toward him. The 3 dragons chirped louder as if excited about something. She stopped right in front of his table, and Jake forgot how to breathe properly. Up close, she was even more beautiful, but also somehow more real than he expected. There were tiny scars on her hands and a weariness in her eyes that suggested she had seen many difficult things. Her clothes were practical rather than fancy. A deep purple flight suit with silver markings that might have been words in elf language. She introduced herself as Luna and asked if he was the mechanic Bill had recommended. Jake managed to nod, though his mouth felt very dry. Luna explained that her ship had been damaged in an asteroid field while she was traveling to deliver important cargo. She needed someone who could work with both human and elf technology, since her ship was a hybrid model. Jake found his voice and told her he could help, though he had never worked on elf technology before. Luna smiled and said she would teach him what he needed to know. The blue dragon suddenly left her shoulder and flew over to Jake, landing gently on his arm. Its tiny claws did not hurt, but Jake could feel a strange warmth spreading from where it touched him. Luna laughed a sound like silver bells in the wind. She said the dragon was named Sky and he was usually very shy around strangers. The fact that Sky trusted Jake was a good sign. The red dragon was Ruby, and the green one was Jade. They were not exactly pets, she explained, but companions who had chosen to travel with her. Jake carefully stood up, trying not to disturb Sky, who seemed content to stay on his arm. He told Luna he could start working on her ship immediately if she wanted. Luna agreed, and they walked together toward the docking platform. The other workers in the station stopped what they were doing to stare at them. A human and an elf walking together was unusual enough, but the 3 dragons made them truly remarkable at the ship. Jake saw the damage was worse than it looked from outside. Several hull panels were completely melted and one of the main power conduits had been severed. Luna explained that she had flown too close to a solar flare while trying to avoid pirates. The ship had saved her life, but barely. Jake got his tools and started examining the damage more closely. The elf technology was fascinating, unlike anything he had studied in his training. It seemed to be partially organic with components that pulsed. With their own light, Luna stood close beside him, pointing out various systems and explaining how they worked. Her presence made it hard for Jake to concentrate, but he forced himself to focus on the task as he worked. Luna told him about her journey. She was carrying medical supplies to a human colony that had been hit by a plague. The medicine was elf-made and could save thousands of lives, but she had to deliver it within the next few days or it would lose its potency. This was why she had taken the dangerous route through the asteroid field. Jake felt a new respect for her as he realized she had risked her life to help humans. Most elves he had heard about stayed away from human problems. They lived so much longer than humans that they often saw human suffering as temporary and unimportant, but Luna was different. The dragons helped in their own way. Ruby breathed tiny flames that Jake could use to weld certain metals. Jade produced a sticky substance from her claws that worked better than any adhesive Jake had ever seen, and Sky seemed to understand exactly which tool Jake needed, often fetching it before he even asked. Hours passed as they worked together. Luna shared stories about her travels, and Jake found himself telling her things he had never told anyone else. He talked about growing up on Earth before leaving to work in space. He mentioned his dream of one day owning his own repair shop on a nice station where families lived instead of just miners and drifters. Luna listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she really cared about his answers. She told him that humans fascinated her because they accomplished so much in their short lives. Elves lived for centuries, but often became set in their ways. Humans brought fresh ideas and enthusiasm to everything they did. As the day cycle ended on the station, Jake had made good progress on the repairs, but there was still much work to do. Luna thanked him and said she would return tomorrow. She called to the dragons, who reluctantly left their various perches around the repair bay. Sky seemed especially unwilling to leave, giving Jake what looked like a sad expression. Before flying after Luna, Jake watched them go, feeling strangely empty. Without their presence, he had been alone for so long on this station that he had forgotten what it felt like to enjoy someone's company. But it was more than that. Something about Luna made him feel like he had been sleeping his whole life and was finally waking up. That night, Jake could not stop thinking about her. He researched elf culture and technology, trying to understand more about her world. He learned that the dragons were called bond dragons, and they only stayed with beings they considered worthy. He wondered what it meant that Sky had trusted him so quickly. The next morning, Jake arrived at the repair bay early, eager to continue working on the ship. Luna was already there, sitting on a crate and humming a melody he did not recognize. The dragons were playing some sort of game that involved chasing each other through the air, leaving trails of sparkly dust. Luna smiled when she saw him, and Jake felt that strange warmth in his chest again. They got to work immediately, but this time their conversation was easier. Jake made Luna laugh with stories about the strange things he had seen people try to fix with tape and wire. Luna taught him elf words and showed him how to read some of their technical symbols. As they worked side by side, Jake realized he was in trouble. He was falling for this elf woman who would leave as soon as her ship was fixed. Days turned into a week as Jake and Luna worked together on her ship. The repairs were complex because elf technology required special handling, and certain parts had to be crafted rather than simply replaced. Luna stayed by his side through every step, teaching him the delicate art of working with living metal and energy crystals. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing hour. Jake learned that Luna was not just delivering medicine, but was actually a princess of sorts, though. She laughed when he used that word. Her father was Lord Asterion, one of the most powerful elf commanders in their fleet. She had chosen to become a courier and healer rather than sit in comfort on their homeworld. Luna explained that she wanted to make a real difference in the universe rather than just attend ceremonies and political meetings. Her father had been furious when she left, but eventually accepted her choice. The dragons had been a gift from him for protection. Though Luna insisted, she could take care of herself. Jake discovered that Luna had a sharp sense of humor and was not afraid to get her hands dirty. Despite her ethereal appearance, she was strong and capable. She could lift heavy equipment that should have been impossible for someone her size, and she understood complex engineering problems faster than anyone Jake had ever met. The dragons became increasingly comfortable around Jake. Ruby would often curl up near his feet while he worked, radiating a gentle warmth that kept him comfortable in the cold repair bay. Jade liked to perch on his shoulder and make soft singing sounds that helped him concentrate. And Sky had taken to sleeping in Jake's toolbox, which should have been annoying, but somehow was not other. Workers on the station started to notice the strange friendship forming between the human mechanic and the elf woman. Some were jealous, especially a few humans who thought Jake was getting too close to someone above his station. Others were simply curious, having never seen an elf spend so much time with humans. One evening, Luna brought dinner to share with Jake in the repair bay. It was elf food unlike anything he had ever tasted before. Fruits that dissolved on his tongue, leaving behind flavors. He had no words for bread that was somehow both light as air and filling water that sparkled, and made him feel more alert than any coffee ever had. As they ate, Luna asked Jake about his dreams for the future. He told her about wanting to build things that mattered, not just fix broken mining equipment. He wanted to create ships that could travel further and faster, bringing different species together in peace. Luna listened with those violet eyes focused entirely on him, making him feel like his dreams were not foolish at all. She told him that elves had a saying that translated roughly to the shortest lives often burn the brightest. Humans might not live as long as elves, but they packed their years with passion and purpose that elves often lost after their first century. She admitted that being around Jake made her feel more alive than she had in decades. The conversation drifted to more personal topics. Luna asked if Jake had ever been in love. He admitted he had thought he was once, but realized later it was just loneliness disguised as affection. Out here in the mining stations, people grabbed onto any connection they could find. But it rarely lasted. Luna shared that elf relationships were usually arranged by their families, based on genetic compatibility and social standing. Love was considered a luxury that might develop over time but was not necessary. She had been promised to another elf lord since she was young, though she had refused to meet him for the past 50 years. Jake felt an irrational stab of jealousy at the thought of Luna with someone else. He tried to hide it, but Luna seemed to notice everything. She placed her hand over his, and the touch sent electricity through his entire body. She said she had never felt about her promised match the way she felt sitting here with Jake in a dirty repair bay on a mining station. The moment was interrupted by an alarm from the ship's console. One of the medical containers was failing, and the medicine inside was starting to degrade. Luna jumped up in panic, saying that if they lost that container, thousands of people would die. Jake immediately got to work trying to stabilize the cooling system. They worked through the night, shoulder to shoulder fighting. To save the precious cargo, the dragons helped where they could with Ruby, providing light and heat when needed. Jade creating emergency seals, and Sky fetching tools and parts. Jake had never worked so hard in his life, knowing that real lives depended on their success. As the station's artificial dawn began, Luna and Jake finally stabilized the container. The medicine was safe, though they had lost a few hours of its potency window. Luna would need to leave soon to make the delivery in time. She looked exhausted but relieved and without thinking. Jake pulled her into a hug. Luna stiffened for a moment, then relaxed against him. She was taller than him, but somehow fit perfectly in his arms. The dragons circled around them, chirping what sounded like approval. Jake could feel Luna's heart beating rapidly, though he was not sure if it was from the stress of the night or something else. When they finally separated, Luna's cheeks had a deeper blue tint that Jake was learning meant she was embarrassed or emotional. She thanked him for saving the medicine and, by extension, the colony. Jake said he would do anything to help her, which came out more seriously than he had intended. Luna looked at him for a long moment, then said she had something important to tell him. She reached into her flight suit and pulled out a crystal about the size of his thumb. It glowed with an inner light that shifted between purple and silver like a tiny captured nebula. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful except for Luna herself. She explained that this was a bonding crystal passed down through her family for generations. In elf culture, when someone offered such a crystal to another, it was a declaration of intention to court them. It was more serious than any human proposal because once accepted, it created a connection that could never be fully broken. Jake stared at the crystal, understanding the weight of what Luna was offering. She was not just saying she liked him. She was offering to bind their lives together in a way that transcended species and distance. But he also understood the complications. Her family would never approve, and their different lifespans meant he would grow old while she remained young. Luna seemed to read his thoughts. She said she knew all the logical reasons why they should not do this. But logic had never made her feel the way she felt when she was with him. She had traveled to hundreds of worlds and met thousands of beings, but none had ever made her want to stay the way Jake did. The dragons landed around them, forming a circle ruby. Jade and Sky began to hum in harmony, creating a sound that was both alien and beautiful. It felt like the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for Jake's answer. Luna held out the crystal and spoke the words that would change everything. "Be brave human," she said. The crystal pulsed brighter as if responding to her voice. Jake looked at it, then at Luna's face, which showed both hope and fear. He thought about his empty life on the station and how alive he had felt these past days. He thought about the risk and the impossibility of it all. Then he thought about the regret he would feel for the rest of his life if he let fear stop him now. His hand moved forward to take the crystal, not knowing that in the shadows of the repair bay, someone was watching. Lord Asterion had arrived on the station an hour ago following his daughter's trail. He had come to bring her home, but instead found her offering their family's most precious heirloom to a human mechanic. The moment Jake's fingers touched the crystal, several things happened at once. The crystal flared with brilliant light that filled the entire repair bay. Jake felt a warmth spread through his body, like nothing he had ever experienced. He could suddenly sense Luna's emotions, as if they were his own, her joy, her fear, her deep affection for him. And then a voice like thunder filled the space, demanding to know what was happening. Lord Asterion stepped out of the shadows, his 7-foot frame covered in silver armor that seemed to contain starlight itself. His eyes blazed with fury as he looked at Jake holding the crystal that had been in his family for 1,000 years. Lord Asterion stood before them like an ancient god made of starlight and rage. His armor reflected the dim lights of the repair bay in ways that hurt to look at directly. His hair was the same silver as Luna's, but longer and seemed to move with its own wind. His violet eyes burned with an intensity that made Jake understand why elves were considered one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. The 3 dragons immediately flew to positions between Jake and the elf lord, though their small size made the gesture more brave than effective. Luna stepped forward, placing herself partially in front of Jake. Her hand found his and squeezed it, giving him strength he desperately needed. "Father," Luna said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "You followed me here." Lord Asterion's expression showed disappointment mixed with his anger. He said he had come because he sensed the bonding crystal being activated. He had thought perhaps she had finally agreed to meet her promised match. Instead, he found her giving their family treasure to a human. Jake wanted to let go of the crystal and run, but something in Luna's touch kept him grounded. He could still feel her emotions through the crystal connection. She was afraid, but also determined. She had expected this confrontation, though perhaps not so soon. Jake realized she had known her father might come and had still chosen to offer him the crystal. "Lord." Asterion walked closer each step, making the metal floor vibrate. He was not just tall, but carried an presence that seemed to bend space around him. Jake had fixed ships for alien admirals and merchant princes, but none had radiated power like this. This was a being who had lived for centuries and commanded fleets that could destroy worlds. The Elf Lord spoke directly to Jake, asking if he understood what he had done by accepting the crystal. His voice was controlled, but Jake could hear the danger underneath, like listening to a volcano that might erupt at any moment. Jake straightened his spine and met those burning violet eyes. He said he understood he had accepted Luna's offer of courtship. Lord Asterion laughed, but there was no humor in it. He asked Jake if he knew what courtship meant to elves. It was not some casual dating arrangement like humans practiced. It was a binding that connected souls across space and time. It was meant for beings who could spend centuries together, not for a human who would be dead before Luna even reached her full maturity. Jake felt each word like a physical blow because they were all true. He would grow old and die while Luna remained young. It was selfish of him to accept her offer, knowing their time would be so limited. But the crystal in his hand pulsed with warmth, and through it he could feel Luna's unwavering certainty. She had thought about all of this and chosen him anyway. Luna spoke up, telling her father that she had made her choice. She reminded him that their own laws said any elf who had reached their second century could choose their own mate. She was well past that age and did not need his permission. Lord Asterion responded that the laws assumed she would choose another elf, not throw away their family legacy on a species that lived barely longer than their pets. The insult made Jake angry enough to find his voice. He told Lord Asterion that humans might have short lives, but they lived them fully. They loved with their whole hearts, and fought for what mattered even when the odds were impossible. They had reached the stars without magic or extended lifespans, using only determination and ingenuity. Lord Asterion turned his full attention to Jake, and the weight of it was almost crushing. He asked Jake what he could possibly offer Luna. His daughter had traveled the galaxy and seen wonders Jake could not imagine. She had access to resources and knowledge that humans would not achieve for millennia. What could a mining station mechanic give her that she could not find among her own kind? Jake thought about the question seriously. He could not offer Luna wealth or power or centuries of companionship, but he could offer her something else. He told Lord Asterion that he could offer Luna the freedom to be herself, not a princess or a symbol, but just Luna. He could offer her adventures in places elves would never go and perspectives they would never consider. He could offer her a love that burned bright and fierce without political calculations or genetic considerations. Luna added that Jake had already given her more than anyone else ever had. He had worked beside her as an equal, not treating her like she was made of glass because she was an elf. He had saved the medicine for the human colony without asking for payment or recognition. He had made her laugh and made her think and made her feel like she was more than just her father's daughter. The dragons began to chirp and sing, creating a harmony that filled the repair bay sky, flew to Jake and landed on his shoulder while Ruby and Jade circled Luna. Their song seemed to be saying something important, though Jake could not understand it. Lord Asterion's expression changed as he listened to them. The Elf Lord said the dragons were singing the song of true bonding. They only did this when they recognized a connection that transcended species and form. The dragons had been in his family longer than even the crystal, and they had never sung this song for Luna's promised match. This gave him pause, though his anger remained. Lord Asterion approached Jake close enough that Jake could see the ancient stars reflected in his armor. The Elf Lord said that if Jake truly believed he was worthy of Luna, then he would prove it through the traditional trials. No elf could refuse a suitor who completed the 3 trials, though they had been designed for elves, not humans. No human had ever attempted them, and survived. Luna protested, saying the trials were unfair and impossible for humans. But Jake surprised everyone, including himself, by accepting. He said he would face any challenge to prove his worth. The crystal in his hand grew warmer, as if approving his decision. Through it, he could feel Luna's mixture of pride and fear for him. Lord Asterion smiled for the first time, but it was not a kind expression. He said the first trial would begin immediately. The trial of courage would test if Jake had the bravery to face death itself for love. Jake would have to retrieve a scale from a wild stellar dragon that hunted in the asteroid fields near the station. These were not like the small bond dragons, but massive creatures that could swallow ships. Luna tried to argue that this was murder. Not a trial, but Lord Asterion said Jake had accepted freely. She could not interfere, though she could provide guidance. The trial had to be completed within 3 days, or Jake would forfeit and never be allowed to see Luna again. The crystal bond would be broken, and Luna would return home immediately. Jake looked at Luna, whose eyes were filling with tears that sparkled like liquid starlight. He told her to trust him, though he had no idea how he would survive. He had never even seen a stellar dragon except in educational videos. They were considered one of the most dangerous creatures in known space. Even experienced hunters rarely survived encounters with them. Lord Asterion opened a portal with a gesture of his hand, showing the swirling chaos of the asteroid field beyond. He told Jake the stellar dragon known as Void Render nested there. It had killed 17 ships in the last year alone. If Jake could bring back one of its scales, he would pass the first trial. If he died, which was likely, the bond would break naturally and Luna would be free. Luna kissed Jake before he could lose his nerve. The kiss was electric and desperate and tasted like starlight and sorrow. Through the crystal bond, he could feel her pouring all her strength into him, trying to give him something to hold on to in the darkness ahead. The three small dragons chirped sadly as if saying goodbye. Jake looked at Lord Asterion and saw something unexpected in those ancient eyes beyond the anger and disapproval. There was curiosity. The Elf Lord was actually interested to see what would happen. He had expected Jake to refuse or run. Instead, this human mechanic was walking toward almost certain death for his daughter. As Jake stepped toward the portal, Luna called out one last piece of advice. She told him stellar dragons were not just animals but ancient beings that respected courage above all else. If he approached as a warrior seeking an honorable challenge, rather than a thief trying to steal, he might have a chance. It was slim, but it was something. Jake nodded and stepped through the portal into the asteroid field. The last thing he heard was the combined song of the three bond dragons following him into the void. Their song seemed to say that he was not going alone even if Luna could not come with him. The portal closed, leaving Luna and her father standing in the repair bay. Lord Asterion told his daughter that her human would be dead within hours. Stellar dragons did not give scales. To anyone who asked nicely, Luna responded that Jake would surprise him just as he had surprised her. She sat down to wait, holding the other half of the bonding connection, and sending all her hope through it to wherever Jake was facing the impossible. She would wait the full 3 days if necessary, believing in the human who had been brave enough to grab their chance at love, despite who was watching. The asteroid field was a nightmare of spinning rock and ice, illuminated only by the distant glow of dying stars. Jake floated in his emergency suit, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The magnetic boots kept him anchored to a large asteroid, but he knew he needed to move deeper into the field where Void Render made its nest. The three bond dragons had somehow followed him through the portal, though Jake had no idea how that was possible. They circled around him in the vacuum, their scales glowing with their own light that helped him see they could survive in space, which Jake filed away as another impossible thing about this whole situation. Jake had grabbed his toolkit before stepping through the portal. Not because tools would help against a stellar dragon, but because they made him feel grounded. He was a mechanic, and mechanics solved problems by understanding how things worked. So he started by observing the asteroid field, looking for patterns. Stellar dragons were energy beings as much as physical creatures, according to what he had quickly researched. They fed on solar radiation and mineral deposits from asteroids. They were also territorial, which meant Void Render would have marked its territory somehow. Jake adjusted his suit's sensors, looking for energy signatures that did not match the background radiation. Sky suddenly flew in front of him, chirping silently in the vacuum, but Jake understood the warning through gestures. The little blue dragon was pointing toward a cluster of asteroids that looked different from the others. They were arranged almost too perfectly, like they had been placed rather than randomly drifting. Jake used his suit's thrusters to move carefully toward the cluster. As he got closer, he saw the asteroids were covered in deep gouges that could only have been made by massive claws. This was the edge of Void Render's territory. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure it would break through his suit, but he kept moving forward. The bond dragon stayed close, with Ruby warming his suit somehow despite the vacuum, and Jade creating a thin film over his visor that enhanced his vision. Sky kept watch, spinning in circles to check all directions. These tiny creatures were protecting him as best they could, and their bravery gave Jake strength. Deeper in the field, Jake saw things that should not exist. Asteroids with perfect holes through them, like something had bitten through solid rock clouds of metallic dust that moved against the solar wind as if they were alive. And then he saw bones, massive bones from creatures Jake could not identify, floating like a graveyard in space. At the center of it all was Void Render's nest. It was not what Jake expected. Instead of a cave or hollow, it was a sphere of twisted metal and crystal from destroyed ships, all fused together into something almost beautiful. In its horror, the sphere was the size of a space station and pulsed with a dark energy that made Jake's instruments go crazy. Jake floated there for a moment, wondering what he was doing. He was a mechanic from Earth who fixed broken things. He was not a hero or a dragon slayer. But then he felt the warmth from the crystal still somehow in his pocket. Despite the suit, and through it, he could feel Luna. She was sending him courage and faith and something that felt like love. Taking a deep breath, Jake activated his suit's communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. He announced himself as Jake Morrison, a human who had come to challenge Void Render for a single scale. He was not here as a thief or an assassin, but as someone who needed to prove his worth for love. He knew the dragon was ancient and might understand many languages, so he repeated the message in every language his suit knew. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sphere began to crack open like an egg, and something emerged that made Jake forget how to breathe. Void. Render was nothing like the educational videos had shown. It was massive, yes, easily 300 feet long, but it was also beautiful in a terrifying way. The stellar dragon was made of what looked like living space itself. Its scales were like windows into deep space, showing stars and nebulae that did not exist in the local area. Its eyes were literally small suns burning with nuclear fire. Its wings, when it spread them, seemed to tear holes in reality itself. And when it moved, it left trails of stardust that sparkled and died in seconds. Void Render circled Jake slowly, and he fought every instinct screaming at him to run. The dragon could destroy him with a thought, but it had not yet. It seemed curious about this tiny human who had announced himself rather than trying to sneak in. The bond. Dragons huddled against Jake but did not flee. Even they were terrified. The stellar dragon spoke, but not with words. Its communication was direct thought that felt like having the universe itself pressed into Jake's mind. It asked why a human sought a scale knowing it meant death. Jake responded as honestly as he could through thought, since words seemed pointless. He shared his feelings for Luna and how she had offered him the bonding crystal. He showed the dragon his memories of working beside her and the joy she brought to his life. He explained about Lord Asterion and the trials and how he needed to prove that human love was worth as much as elf tradition. He held nothing back, because he sensed Void Render would know if he lied. The dragon was silent for a long time, processing this information. Then it laughed, a sound that was like supernovas exploding in sequence. It said it had lived for millennia and had never been approached this way. Warriors had come seeking glory, and hunters had come seeking trophies, but none had come seeking proof of love. Void Render asked Jake if he understood what he was requesting. A stellar dragon's scales were not just physical objects, but fragments of the dragon's essence. To give one away was to give away a piece of its soul. The dragon asked what Jake could offer in exchange that was worth such a sacrifice. Jake thought about this carefully. He could not offer the dragon wealth or power or anything material. But then he had an idea. He offered to fix something for the dragon. Surely in all its years something had been broken or lost that even a stellar dragon could not repair. Jake was good at fixing things. It was all he really knew how to do. The dragon seemed amused by this offer. It asked what a human mechanic could possibly fix for a being made of stars and void. Jake responded that he would not know until he tried, but he had fixed things for dozens of species and had never failed to at least make things better. Void Render considered this, then made a decision. It would give Jake a chance to prove his worth, but not through combat, through problem solving. The dragon had something that had been broken for centuries. If Jake could fix it, he would earn a scale. If he failed, he would become part of the bone field surrounding the nest. The stellar dragon led Jake deeper into its nest sphere. The inside was bizarre, with gravity that changed directions and spaces that were bigger on the inside than outside. At the center was something that made Jake gasp. It was a massive crystal similar to the bonding crystal Luna had given him, but the size of a house. It was cracked and dark, with only occasional flickers of dying light. Void Render explained, this was its heart crystal, the source of its connection to its mate who had died fighting in a war 800 years ago. The crystal had cracked when she died, and had been slowly failing ever since. Soon it would go completely dark, and Void Render would follow its mate into whatever came after death for stellar dragons. Jake examined the crystal using every scanning tool in his suit and all his knowledge of both human and elf technology. The crack was not just physical, but seemed to exist in dimensions. Jake could barely perceive the bond dragons flew around the crystal, singing their strange songs, and their music seemed to make the dying light pulse stronger. An idea began to form in Jake's mind. It was insane and should not work. But most of his Life lately had been impossible. The bonding crystal Luna had given him was similar in structure to this massive heart crystal. What if the same principles applied just on a different scale? Jake worked for hours that felt like days. He used every tool in his kit, and some improvised ones made from debris in the nest. Ruby provided precise heat when he needed to fuse certain materials. Jade created adhesive stronger than molecular bonds. Sky seemed to understand the energy patterns and helped. Jake direct flows of power, but the real breakthrough came when Jake realized the crystal was not just broken, but incomplete. It was trying to maintain a connection that only existed on one side, like a phone call, where one person had hung up. Jake could not bring back Void Render's mate, but he could complete the circuit in a different way. Using his own bonding crystal as a template, Jake created a feedback loop within the heart crystal. It would no longer reach out for a connection that could not answer, but would instead cycle its energy internally. The crystal would never be what it was, but it would be stable and strong in a new way. When Jake made the final connection, the heart crystal blazed with light. Not the same light as before, but something different yet still beautiful. Void Render made a sound that might have been crying or singing or both. The stellar dragon said Jake had not fixed the crystal, but had given it a new purpose which was perhaps better true to its word. Void Render pulled a scale from its chest. It was the size of a dinner plate and contained what looked like an entire galaxy within its surface. The dragon warned Jake that carrying it would mark him forever as someone who had earned the respect of a stellar dragon. This would bring both protection and danger in equal measure. After resting for a day, Jake felt ready to face the second trial. Though ready was a relative term when dealing with ancient elf riddles, Luna had spent the time teaching him basic elf language and concepts, but she was forbidden from helping with the actual riddle. Lord Asterion watched them with an unreadable expression, as if reassessing everything he thought he knew about humans. The riddle of stars was presented in a sphere of light that Lord Asterion conjured in the center of the repair bay. Ancient elf symbols floated within it, constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. The riddle had existed for 3,000 years, and no one had solved it completely. Some scholars had understood parts, but the full answer remained a mystery. Lord Asterion explained that Jake had 3 attempts to answer. If all 3 were wrong, he would fail the trial. The riddle asked what force bound the universe together, despite all logic suggesting it should fly apart. What made order from chaos and meaning from randomness? What was both the smallest thing and the largest thing simultaneously? Jake stared at the shifting symbols, trying to make sense of them with his limited understanding of elf language. Luna had taught him that elf philosophy was different from human thinking. They saw the universe as a living thing, with consciousness woven through everything. Humans tended to see it as a machine following physical laws. The bond dragon settled around Jake as he worked. Sky perched on, his head Jade on his left shoulder and Ruby on his right. They hummed softly, creating a harmony that helped him concentrate. Through the bonding crystal he could feel Luna's presence like a warm hand on his heart. She could not help directly, but she was with him. Jake's first approach was scientific. He considered the fundamental forces that physics had discovered: gravity, electromagnetic force, strong and weak, nuclear forces. But none of these fit all aspects of the riddle. They bound things together, but they did not create meaning from randomness. His second approach was philosophical. He thought about consciousness and how observations seemed to affect reality at the quantum level. But this felt incomplete too. It explained some aspects, but not the part about being both smallest and largest. Hours passed as Jake studied the riddle from every angle. The station workers had gathered to watch, though they kept a respectful distance. Everyone knew something historic was happening. A human was attempting trials that had been designed to be impossible for any non-elf. Then Jake noticed something odd about how the symbols moved. They were not random, but followed patterns that reminded him of something he had seen similar patterns before. When working with Luna on her ship, the way elf technology integrated with living systems, the way energy flowed through their crystals. Suddenly Jake understood the riddle was not just asking for an answer, but demonstrating it through its own existence. The symbols were not just writing, but a living example of what they were asking about. Jake stood up and approached the sphere of light. For his first answer, Jake said the force was connection itself, not gravity or magnetism, but the deeper principle that allowed any two things to relate to each other. It was what let atoms form molecules, and molecules form life, and life form consciousness. It was both the smallest thing, a single connection between two particles, and the largest thing, the web of all connections that made up existence. Lord Asterion raised an eyebrow but said this was only partially correct. Jake had one aspect but was missing something crucial. Jake had 2 attempts remaining. Jake went back to studying, but now with a different perspective. He watched how the bond dragons interacted with each other and with him. They were separate beings but connected in ways that transcended physical space. When one was happy, they all seemed brighter. When one was worried, they all became protective. His second answer built on the first. Jake said the force was not just connection but conscious connection. What bound the universe was the ability of things to recognize and respond to each other. From particles exchanging forces to minds, exchanging ideas. It was all the same principle at different scales. Lord Asterion admitted this was closer, but still incomplete. Jake was seeing the mechanism, but not the source. One attempt remained, and Jake could feel the tension in the room. Everyone knew if he failed, Luna would have to leave forever. Jake sat in silence for a long time. He thought about his journey so far. Meeting Luna, working beside her, accepting the crystal facing void render. None of it made logical sense, but it had all happened. Because of one thing, he looked at Luna and saw tears in her violet eyes. She believed he could do this even if she did not know how. Then Jake understood completely. The answer had been in front of him the whole time, demonstrated by everything that had happened. He stood and gave his final answer. The force that bound the universe together was love. Not romantic love alone, but the broader principle of choosing connection, despite separation. Choosing to bond, despite differences. Choosing to create meaning in a universe that could be meaningless. It was both the smallest thing, a single choice to connect, and the largest thing, the sum of all such choices across all existence. The sphere of light suddenly exploded into countless fragments that swirled around the room before reforming into new patterns. These were not random symbols but images showing the history of the universe. From the first particles choosing to bond into atoms, to civilizations, choosing to reach across the void to each other. Every image showed the same pattern repeated at different scales. Lord Asterion stood in complete shock. He said Jake had not just solved the riddle but had seen deeper into it than the elf scholars who had created it. They had thought the answer was about energy or consciousness. But Jake had seen that these were just expressions of something more fundamental. Luna ran to Jake and embraced him, while the bond dragons sang in celebration. But the trials were not over. Lord Asterion composed himself and announced the third and final trial. This one would test love itself. The trial was simple in concept but impossible in practice. Jake had to choose between Luna and something of equal value. Lord Asterion would offer Jake enough wealth to buy his own planet and live like a king for the rest of his human life. Or he could choose Luna, knowing their time together would be brief by elf standards and filled with challenges. Jake did not hesitate for even a second. He said he chose Luna. Lord Asterion said he had not finished explaining the offer, but Jake interrupted, saying it did not matter. No amount of wealth or power could equal what he felt for Luna. He had not gone through the previous trials for a reward, but for the chance to be with her. Lord Asterion tried again, saying Jake could have life extension technology that would triple his lifespan. Jake refused again. He said he would rather have 1 natural lifetime with Luna than 3. Without her, the elf lord offered knowledge and secrets that could advance human civilization by centuries. Jake still refused. Finally, Lord Asterion asked Jake why he was so certain, without even considering the alternatives. Jake said it was because love was not a transaction, where you weighed options. It was a choice you made completely or not at all. He had made his choice the moment he accepted the crystal, and nothing could change. That. Lord Asterion was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, a real smile, not mockery or condescension. He said Jake had passed all 3 trials, but more importantly, had taught him something. He had been so focused on what Jake could not offer Luna that he had not seen what he could. The Elf Lord said Jake offered Luna something no elf could. He offered her the urgency of mortal love that did not have centuries to develop slowly. He offered her perspective from someone who saw every day as precious because he did not have unlimited days. He offered her a love that was brave enough to face impossible odds. Lord Asterion performed a ceremony right there in the repair bay, binding Jake and Luna formally as mates. The bonding crystal Jake carried merged with its other half, creating a single crystal that would connect them always. The Bond Dragon sang a song that was joined by harmonies that seemed to come from the walls themselves. But Lord Asterion had one more surprise. He said that while he could not change Jake's human nature, he could ensure they had as much time together as possible. He gave Jake a gift, a small portion of elf longevity that would not make him immortal, but would ensure he and Luna aged at closer rates. They would have perhaps 200 years together, instead of just 60. Jake and Luna were married a month later in a ceremony that brought together humans and elves in a way that had never happened before. The story of the trials spread across the galaxy, becoming legend. Different species told it different ways, but the core remained the same. Love could make the impossible possible. They settled on a station between human and elf space, where Jake opened his repair shop as he had always dreamed. But now it was more than that. It became a place where different species brought their ships and their problems. Jake fixed machines while Luna healed bodies, and sometimes they worked together to heal deeper wounds between species that had been separated by fear and misunderstanding. The 3 Bond Dragons grew, over the years reaching the size of small horses but never losing their playful nature. They had children of their own, eventually filling the station with the sound of dragon songs. Ruby Jade and Sky became known as the dragons who had witnessed the trials, and their offspring were sought after as companions by those who valued courage and love.